Okay, so we've talked about ideology, and we discussed communism, we discussed liberalism, and conservatism. Okay, so basically, Marxism talks about the idea of who controls the means of production. Okay, so Marxist critique is that the means of production, okay, economic world, okay, is centered upon the elite class. So based on social hierarchy. So any economic, let's say, in a society, any means of economic production is geared towards supporting the wealthy class and not the common class. So that's the basic argument of Marxism. And then we've talked about conservatism and liberalism. Now, conservatism and liberalism, okay, are not part of the Marxist system. In a liberal and conservative society, you will see that there exists a class, okay, a group of people, okay, a class structure. Now, the liberalists, their sole purpose is to change the status quo or challenge the status quo. And the conservatives, their sole purpose is to conserve, okay, the word conservatism, or protect the status quo. What do we mean by status quo? Now, status quo, let me give you an example, and I've already talked about this example here. The status quo, we are used to we are used to the idea that men and women should get married and procreate, okay, in order for human society or survival of the human species. So if you are conservative, then you would like to protect that status quo, okay? So if you are liberalist, then you are, okay, you will try not to protect the status quo, or you will try to change the status quo. So in that example, if you're a liberalist, then you would entertain the idea of same-sex marriage, okay? So that's basically, you can say, the difference between conservatives and liberals. Okay, let me give you another example. If you talk about economy, the conservative government would want a bigger government, okay, bigger role of the government, okay, bigger role of the state. That's why in most of these countries they would advocate for nationalization, okay. However, the liberalist economy, they would advocate for more of a free flow or less government intervention. Okay, because the conservatives operate on the notion that human beings, and when left, okay, alone or unchecked, has a potential for anarchy. So the conservatives would want to protect their research, and they would argue that institutions protect people so that they not go out of line. Okay, that's why they argue for big government, and liberalists would argue for a small government. And liberalists believe in individual freedom, and as far as individual freedom is concerned, big government will affect individual freedom. Okay, so it comes back to this idea of one who wants to protect the status quo and one who wants to change the status quo. Okay, so after that we've come down to socialism. Now, why is socialism different from liberalism, conservatism, and more or less socialism sort of moved towards the Marxist line of thought? But in a conservative and a liberalist society, although conservative would, both of them, they don't so much believe in the idea of common community, okay, or common ownership. Okay? So common ownership in a socialist country, okay, is very much the cornerstone of that society. So here, socialism, and if you see here, the definition is here. Socialism talks about community, equality, and common ownership. Okay, common ownership. Now, why is it important? When you talk about common ownership, the heart of common ownership is community. So here, and I'll read, socialism developed as a reaction against the emergence of industrial capitalism. Socialism first articulated the interest of craftsmen threatened by the spread of factory production, but it was being linked to the growing industrial working class. Now, let me bring you to the current example now. Why socialism came out and socialism tried to portray a concern, okay, for our generation now, at the present time now. You look at the technological revolution of artificial intelligence. Very soon, artificial intelligence will replace the workforce, okay? Now, instead of me coming here and teaching you guys about politics, artificial intelligence have already taken that space. You just click on ChatGPT and you see the discussions that I am talking about is similar to what ChatGPT is talking about. Now, when that happened, okay, this affects human beings. Now, if human beings doesn't stand together, then what happened? In an hypothetical future, or if you see Terminator, the artificial intelligence will, okay, they will run over the human race. So something like that. So having that in mind, in the Industrial Revolution, during that time, the manual labor were taken over by industries, okay? Now you have factories that makes balloon. Formerly you have men making balloons, for example. So a response to that brought about the ideology of socialism, the idea of community, of communal or common ownership. So that's the very much this first paragraph here wants to talk about. But here, let me see, the 6 elements. This is important when you look at socialism countries. There are 6 elements here. The first element here is community. So, and I'll read a vision of human beings as a social creatures linked by the existence of a common humanity. Socialists also believe that individual identity is fashioned by social interactions and therefore behavior is explained by social factors. In Papua New Guinea, we very much work in that explanation here. You can say you're an individual, but when you go home, you are part of a community. That communal spirit exists. So very much community, individuals depend on community. Why? Because when you go out there, you don't just walk out there and catch the bus and go home. You will go out there, stand around there, queue around there, talk to your friends, go to the bus stop, Chubuai, talk to the bidronat seller, get on the bus, talk to the bus crew. So you are actually participating in these interactions. So socialists believe that communal interactions is important. Second element, socialists believe that humanity is bound together by the same sense of fraternity. Now, what is this fraternity we are talking about? We are all seated here. We exhibit this example of fraternity. We are forming this bond as a lecturer and student, and you as a student of politics. So you feel that you belong to Introduction to Government and Politics course by coming here and sitting down and listening to me. That is an example of this idea of fraternity. Now, thirdly, socialists emphasize the importance of social equality in terms of equality of outcome, as opposed to the liberal idea of equality of opportunity. Now, this is important. Now, socialist countries, example, China is a socialist country. In a socialist country, they believe in the idea of equality of outcome, then equality of opportunity. Now, an example would be, I'll give an example about this idea in terms of women participation in parliament. Now, men are arguing that women should have competed in the elections just like the men candidates or male candidates do. This is the example of equality of opportunity. Men are arguing that they should run the same race that men are running in each election. So in a conservative, liberal countries or society, you would see that they very much promote this idea of equality of opportunity. Okay? They should have equal opportunity to contest the elections. Now, if you are living in a socialist country, then your argument would be the playing field should be equal. And that is where equality of outcome comes in. The 22 reserved seats for women is based on this idea of socialist idea here, equality of outcome. Meaning that if 50% of men are in parliament, then the parliament should create another 50% or seat in the parliament that should be specially reserved for women. Okay? So in countries like China and even some what they call socialist democratic country in Europe, Denmark is an example, they sort of exhibit this kind of notion of equality of outcome. Okay, Papua New Guinea also, an example of a socialist policy in Papua New Guinea is through the free education policy, no man left behind. Okay, formally introduced by successive governments that exhibit this idea of equality of outcome. Okay. Number 4, socialists believe in the material benefits, or socialists believe that material benefits should be distributed on the basis of need rather than simply on the basis of merit or work. So that follows the line, or follows the third element here. But the idea here is that they believe that material benefits should be distributed on the basis of need and not work or merit. Now, if you have that in countries like China, then they will argue that wealth should be distributed equally. So if you are rich, if you are a wealthy billionaire in China, then the state will have the right to come in and have certain percentage of your wealth being given over to the state, so the state should distribute this wealth to the rest of the society. So that is an example of this argument that material should be distributed on the basis of need than merit. In capitalist country, you can't distribute wealth like that. So if you see element number 4, it has a similar tone as those of the Marxist ideology, where wealth should be distributed evenly. Okay? Number 5, socialists aim to eradicate or substantially reduce class distinction that exists in capitalist society. So socialists, again here, a similar argument like the Marxists. They want to destroy or reduce class distinctions in a society. So community, if you are someone that espouse or someone that encourages common ownership, then why would you need class? Why would you need different hierarchy of or different class system? Okay, so in a class system, in a capitalist society, you have the wealthiest, okay, the middle class, the working class, and the peasants. Okay, something like that. Number 6 element. Although no longer considered essential, the socialist ideology once emphasized common ownership as a means of harnessing material resources to common good as private property. So something like they don't like private property, socialist countries. So you will see that the idea of socialist is similar to Marxism. But the only difference there is that Marxism is an idea that criticizes and talks about economic freedom or economic wealth or the distribution of economic wealth. Socialism is different. Socialism as its, let's say, socialism is spread throughout a wide variety of social issues and not solely based on economic issues. So the main types of ideologies today, you would have noticed that you have a Marxist ideology, liberal ideology, conservative ideology, and socialist ideology. Now, in addition to those ideologies, okay, there are other ideologies also that exist, but not so much dominant. And such ideologies are, and if you look at page 40, fascism is an example. Okay, fascism here, the definition is the organically unified national community. So, I'll try and read the first sentence here, so the first paragraph. Although fascist beliefs can be traced back to the late 19th century, they were fused together and shaped by First World War and its aftermath. The two principal manifestations of fascism were Mussolini's fascist dictatorship in Italy and during 1922 to 1943, Hitler Nazi dictatorship in Germany. So, during that period of the 19th century, at a brief period, this idea of fascism existed. So this idea or ideology is based on what is called the organically unified national community. I'll give you an example in Nazi Germany. Why this organically unified national community? The Nazi political party, or you can say a propaganda, Adolf Hitler is the ruler of the Nazi German party. They wanted to build a society based on the dominance of one particular race, and that is the German Aryan race. So they argue that German Aryan race is superior to the rest of the other races in the world. And that ideology led to led to the high number of deaths, okay, by Germans to the Jews. If you look at paragraph 3 here, a core theme that runs to fascism is the ideal of organically unified national community. In this respect, fascism sees individual as subordinate to the community. So this is important here. Fascism sees individuals subordinate to the community. So if you do not subordinate or if you do not listen to the community, then there is a consequence for it. And that fascism also has a similar line of argument or like that of socialism and Marxism theory. Talks about community, but this community is what is called the organic unified community. Talks about a particular race. So in Germany, they see that Jewish community are a very wealthy community, okay, across the world. So in such ideology as fascism, they wouldn't want, it's against this idea of insubordination or subordinate. They see that Jews cannot, okay, subordinate themselves to this idea of fascism or the Nazi Germany. Okay, is that clear? Okay. Now let me move on. I'm talking too much and I haven't started on Unit 6 yet. Let me try and give a brief summary. Now, okay, the next is feminism. Okay, feminism is, in addition to most of the, you would see that feminism ideology is sort of contested under liberal and conservative society. But feminism itself is the, okay, or a belief in the domination of women by men. So this whole argument of feminism is that in the world today, in our society, men, okay, sort of dominate women. Okay? So I believe in the domination of women by men. So in that regard, if you are feminism living in the United States, you would support the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party under Donald Trump. Why? And if you go back to our ideology on liberal and conservatives, conservatism likes to change the status quo. Liberalism likes to change the status quo, and conservatives like to keep the status quo. So the status quo, as far as this feminism ideology is concerned, we have seen throughout our history the idea of patriarchy. Patriarchy meaning that man has been at the forefront of human evolution. Men are responsible for family, men are responsible to build a community, build a village, men are responsible to go to war. So that carries this idea of patriarchy. So if you are conservatism, or if you are conservatives, then you would agree that patriarchy plays an important role in the society, in our society. But if you are a liberal person, then you would argue that patriarchy is bad for our society because it limits and restricts the role of women. So when the liberals started to complain against the patriarchy, that saw the birth of the feminist movement in the 1960s. So feminist ideology is an offshoot of the liberal ideology, in which the feminist ideology believed in the domination of women by men. Okay. So if they see that, so feminists would argue that there should be 22 reserved seats for women in parliament because men are dominating parliament, and this is not okay. So that's an argument feminists would make. Or the universities should, or introduction to government and politics should open up 50% of its spaces to allow women. Okay, that's a feminist argument. However, in this class list alone, there seems to be more women than men. So something like in Papua New Guinea, there is a mismatch in current status when you look at the role of women in politics. We have more women in the universities now. Yesterday I read in the papers there are more women that graduated from LTI and are becoming lawyers. But the earliest birth of this idea here, that's an important important idea, feminism, and it still exists today. In the 1960s, they argued that women should leave domesticated roles, meaning that they should not be housewife only. They should go out, seek education, and they should work and be independent. So that is the idea of espoused by feminists. Okay, I won't go through the different, the various forms of feminism here. Yeah, I'll talk about the other one is environmentalism. This idea of environmentalism is, you can say, a concern for human degradation of the environment. So, if you're someone that believes in the protection of the environment, then you would advocate for environmentalism in as far as government activity is concerned. So over the years, there has been increase in manufacturing, increase in industries, and what the consequence of that is that it results in pollution and other issues that affects the ecology as a result of the industries, deforestation, for example. So that led to the creation of the ideology of environmentalism. That's around 1970s and 1980s. So you have about 30 minutes, so I'll just briefly summarize this. So if you look at your summary here, it gives you a detail, or you can say it gives you a summary of what these ideas talks about. You can see here, so liberalism, which believes in personal freedom and individualism. Conservatism, which is the desire to preserve the existing society. So if you look at an issue, if you read the papers and look at issues, whether in Papua New Guinea or in other countries, Australia, New Zealand, try to see and ask yourself whether those issues falls in the line of liberalism, conservatism, or socialism, for that matter. So if you look at an issue that talks about, let's say, human rights or migration, try and see whether the issue that issue in the article is more advocating for personal freedom or individual freedom. Then you would see that the article is advocating for liberalism. So if you look at the article that tries to talk about strengthening the borders, protecting institutions, strengthening immigration policy, then that article is swinging towards a conservatism idea. Okay, so this here, you can use this summary to use it as a lens to understand issues. In Papua New Guinea, we do not espouse, or we do not have a clear ideological roadmap to follow. So you would see that the arguments presented here would capture little bits and pieces of all these different ideologies. Okay, so let's look at Unit 6. Unit 6, I have about 30 minutes or 25 minutes to cover Unit 6. So let's start. Again, here, if you look at Unit 6, we are interested in first looking at the objectives. So here, upon the completion of this unit, you should be able to explain the basic functions and characteristics of constitutions, describe the relationship between the constitution and the liberal democracy, outline key features of Papua New Guinea constitution. Now let us go through, let's see if we can explain the basic functions and characteristics. What are the basic functions and characteristics? Okay, functions is found in page 45. So let's look at this idea of constitution. What is a constitution? Here, the constitution talks about, or is the rules that govern the government. Okay? The government that existed today existed on the basis of a constitution. So highlight the first sentence here of the constitution. Constitutions are sets of rules which allocate duties, powers and functions to various institutions of government and define the relationship between individuals and the state. So constitution the constitution itself speaks of rules, process and procedures. The institutions that we have in our country follows rules, procedures, okay, and laws that guide the workings of these institutions. And those that occupy institutional office abide by these same rules, procedures, okay, and laws. If you look at the second paragraph here, therefore a constitution is a set of fundamental rules which establish powers and responsibilities of the legislature. Executive and judiciary branches of the government allocates powers to different levels of the government, such as federal, provincial, and local. The Constitution also enumerates rights of citizens in relationship to each other and to the government. For example, the Bill of Rights stipulates procedure for amending it. So, a constitution, remember, it's a set of rules, procedures, or guidance. Now, what is the functions of the constitution? The general functions of the constitution are in two. Number one, limited government, and number two, government structure. Now, if you look at limited government, a constitution is a device for limiting the power of the government. In other words, a constitution is the rights of citizens, and doing so creates limits and duties for the government. Now, in political science, and I kept repeating this to my students in the internal mode as well, the general principle rule for politics is absolute power corrupts absolutely. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. When power is left unchecked, power is bound to corrupt. That is the reason why you need constitution. It's like human beings. Each of us seated here. Okay? If there is no laws that separates us, or there is no laws in this country, we would be killing each other for a scrap of food, because it is an inbuilt, innate nature of any persons, or in the animal kingdoms, it is their nature to contest for survival, or the survival of the fittest. In so doing, in that line of thinking, politics has evolved, and that has brought forth this principle of absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, when that happened, when there is no check, power corrupts itself. Take, for instance, your good Prime Minister, James Marape. When he comes in, or even Peter O'Neill in 2012, Peter O'Neill and James Marape, when they came into power, they were the savior of Papua New Guinea. If you're living in 2012 and if you're living in 2018, I believe, you would have been really happy to see a new Prime Minister. But over time, Peter O'Neill has been corrupted and James Marape has been corrupted. Now, the only checks to ensure that they come back in line in section 145 of the Constitution. So what I'm trying to say here is that in that example here, if left unchecked, power is bound to corrupt. That is the reason why one of the functions of the Constitution is limited government. Limited government meaning that so much power should not be given to only one entity of the government. You as citizens should have certain rights. The institution should have certain rights. Okay? Even the politicians should have certain rights. Now, if you look at the parliament sitting, the last parliament sitting, we would have noticed that a lot of members in parliament were not happy with the court recalling parliament. It is in this very principle here about limited government. The parliament should not overuse its powers on the floor of parliament. Overusing powers meaning that the parliament should not bulldoze the parliamentary process. When the parliament bulldozes the parliamentary process, then the parliament is exhibiting insurmountable power, and that's dangerous. That is why the court has to intervene. So the Constitution, the very heart of any Constitution, is built on the idea of limiting the power of the government or the institution. So here, the sentence here, a constitution is a device for limiting the power of the government. In other words, a constitution limits the rights of citizens. In doing so, creates limits and duties for the government. If the parliament exists and uses or abuses power, then who should keep the parliament in check? The judiciary. That's why the opposition took that matter to court, because they felt that the overall majority in parliament, have not taken into account due processes. So they went to court, and the court recalled parliament to allow parliament to go back to rectifying the due processes. So that is important when you talk about government, limited government. And in any constitution, the fundamentals or the functions of the constitution is to limit the power of the government. Okay? Secondly, government structure. A constitution sets out structure of the government by outlining formal distribution of authority within state. This is very much straightforward. The University of Papua New Guinea is created by the 1969 University of Papua New Guinea Act, I believe. So that act alone, that law alone, sets limits, sets structures, and it's the reason why that creates such courses as IGP, Introduction to Government and Politics, creates this wonderful room that we are seated in with aircon. So an example is that the Constitution gives structure to the institutions. Okay? So you call yourself a Papua New Guinea today because one of the functions of the Constitution is to create, the idea of citizenship, the idea of sovereignty. Okay? Now let me see if I tick objective number 1. Yep. Okay, let's look at objective number 2. Describe the relationship between constitution and liberal democracy. Now, let me see if there is a mention here. Okay, so when I talk about the constitution and liberal democracy, we are moving towards the functions, characteristics of the constitution, moving towards this idea of what constitute or what is constitutionalism, the idea of constitution. So that is found in page 46. So I've stretched here, Okay, and I've talked about one function is limited government, but the idea of constitutionalism here very much. So I sort of stated this earlier, but the idea of constitutionalism is a belief in limited government. I've already talked about what limited government is. So in a liberal democracy, they believe in this idea of constitutionalism. The only checks in power, is the idea of constitutionalism, so that the government or people or entities within the state should not abuse their power. So constitutionalism is a belief in limited power. Okay, so let me read the first sentence. So we need to distinguish the Constitution as a document from constitutionalism, which is a doctrine that says government should be subject to law. All constitution, whether of it be British unwritten or Papua New Guinean written, ultimately manifest an underlying attitude or spirit of constitutionalism. A belief in government, okay, and this idea of constitutionalism. I want you to highlight this sentence here, the first sentence here, but most importantly, where constitutionalism is, highlight it, which is a doctrine that says government should be subjected to law. The idea of constitutionalism is that a government should be subjected to the law. So when a government is not subjected to the law, that is where you see our opposition who brought that motion or brought that grievance forward to the court for representation. So our opposition are arguing that our government were not subjected to the law. What is that law? The parliamentary standing orders or the rules and procedures of parliament. Okay? So if the government are not fulfilling their obligation to follow the parliamentary standing orders, then the government is risk of being not fulfilling this idea of constitutionalism. Okay? So very much Unit 6. Important in Unit 6 is we must understand that the functions of the Constitution come in two parts. Number one, limited government, and number two, government structures. Limit the power of the government and provide a structure in which the government operates in. Now, the functions of the government operates on the notion of, or the fundamental notion of the idea of constitutionalism. The idea of constitutionalism is a belief in limited government. What does that mean, belief in the limited government? And if you look at the first sentence here, it talks about the doctrine that says that government should be subjected to the law. If the government is not subjected to the law, then the government is, can be said to not following due processes, or the government is sometimes called about, you can say the government is above the law, which is dangerous. So the government should always be subjected to the law. Okay, let's look at Papua New Guinea Constitution. Okay, the Constitution of Papua New Guinea. So in mid-1972, our Constitutional Planning Committee, the CPC, was established to come up with a homegrown constitution for the independent state of Papua New Guinea. The CPC was comprised of political parties and groupings in parliament, and at the same time, the idea behind a homegrown constitution is that it may enhance the legitimacy of the government among the people of the new Papua New Guinea state. Now, in the first sentence, our constitution, importantly, we must, by now, after this we must know that Papua New Guinea's constitution is an homegrown constitution. An homegrown constitution, the constitution is being made up of, or the constitution, okay, went through a consultative process that all sectors, segments of the society, okay, represented or presented their views, okay, and agreed to what kind of country Papua New Guinea should be. And that views are captured in the CPC, or the Constitutional Planning Committee, okay, the CPC. That was in 1972, and on the 15th of August 1975, Papua New Guinea Constitution formally adopted the House of Assembly, okay, recommendation to create a parliament, and following here, our constitution was put in place. So our constitution follows the British model. However, the British model is an unwritten constitution. Papua New Guinea is a written constitution. So Papua New Guinea's constitution is like that of the United States. Papua New Guinea has a written constitution, but Papua New Guinea constitution is an homegrown constitution. Why homegrown? Because the Papua New Guinea constitution, and through the CPC report, okay, has made, through their consultative process, have taken the views of everyone, okay, in the country, including the village people. That is where we have, uniquely in Papua New Guinea, we have a customary law. Customary law is an indication of our, or is an example of what, or example of an homegrown constitution. So in our constitution and like our government setup here, you have the voters who elect the legislature, and the legislature choose the prime minister, and the legislature can choose and dismiss the prime minister. Okay? That is why the prime minister's job is not safe in Papua New Guinea. The prime minister is always coming under vote of no confidence pressure, section 145 of the constitution. So the legislature, okay, like in the UK, the legislature holds significant power. The role of the legislature is to make law. That is why only the legislature can choose, appoint, and dismiss the prime minister. And who picks the legislature, or the parliament? Who creates, who chooses the legislature? The voters. So we are complaining about our government. We are complaining about James Marape, but who put James Marape in power? Who voted for Pangu Party? Every one of us seated here. We voted for Pangu Party. So if you don't like our government, then in each election, we have to make sure that we vote the kind of person, the kind of leaders that we want. We don't vote leaders based on Coca-Cola and, a bag of chips when they come in election time and distribute these things. When you keep voting based on cola and, cola and Pepsi, then you will get the kind of cola and Pepsi leadership. It sounds funny, but here, the parliamentary system is set in such a way that legislature has a very big role and responsibility. And who chooses, who picks the legislature? It is you and I. So James Marape is right to say that the legislature did not pick Pangu Party. The people of Papua New Guinea picked Pangu Party. So why should James Marape listen to the legislature? If you want to change James Marape, then you do it in 2027. Huh? So something like that. So here, but we've adopted, our constitution gives okay, as the guidance and the structure here. So I got carried away here. So the legislature here chooses and can dismiss the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister now chooses the next National Executive Council. The National Executive Council is one arm of the government. There are three arms of the government: the legislature, who makes law, the National Executive Council, who execute laws, and the judiciary, who interpret laws. Choosing the Prime Minister is very, very important. The legislature chooses the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister appoints and chooses his executive government, or the Prime Minister chooses the government. And then you have the administrator, the ministers, and the department. So this is where how the constitution or the political system is set up through the constitution. Now the key features of our constitution. Now this is important. In Papua New Guinea's constitution is built around the 5 national goals and directive principles. This is very, very important. The constitution talks about these 5 important national goals and directive principles. Number 1, human development. Citizens should be free from domination and having the opportunity to develop as a whole person. If you are not, okay, if you don't have that freedom to develop as a human being, if you're still living in the bushes, then the constitution, okay, said that the government should be, okay, should take note that should provide conducive environment for you to develop as a whole person. Okay, you should have access to health, education, and other important services to live in Papua New Guinea. Now, secondly, is important also, equality and participation. Also, the citizens should have equal opportunity to participate in and benefit from the development of the country. You should have equal opportunity to have an access to education. The government on the floor, or in the last parliament sitting, argued that, okay, the opposition said that debate was not entertained. Okay, that means that they did not have an equal opportunity to debate on the floor of parliament whether to, okay, debate, okay, on the motion of no confidence. That is at the state level, but equality and participation is important. There is a seat for women. Women should have equal opportunity to participate in politics. The constitution gives, okay, that guarantee or opportunity. Number 3, national sovereignty and self-reliance. Papua New Guinea should be politically and economically independent. We are politically independent. Are we economically independent? So the economy should be self-reliance. So the constitution talks about that. Natural resource and environment is number 4. Papua New Guinea should be politically and economically, Papua New Guinea's natural resources and environment should be conserved and used for collective benefit of present and future generations. We should conserve and preserve our natural resources. We should not, okay, overexploit our resources. And then Papua New Guinea ways. Development is achieved primarily through the use of Papua New Guinea forms of social, political, and economic organization. We have different cultures. We should promote Papua New Guinean ways. Now, Papua New Guinean ways, one of the Papua New Guinean ways is accountability. I'll give you an example. In the village, when it is part of our tradition custom, when the village chief, okay, goes out for hunting, certain, let's say, village chief and certain of his clansmen, when there is a very big feast, they go out for hunting and they cook a very big feast. They do not go into the houseman and distribute the feast or the kaikais. No, they will put it out in an open area where all the people will be, or the clans will be, and then they will deal, okay? Give out, distribute the feast or the foods to everyone in the community. Okay, this is an example of Papua New Guinean ways. And that's something we should incorporate this spirit on the floor, or expect this, okay, expect this kind of ways happening in Parliament or in our government. The government, when talking about distributing funds, should be transparent and accountable. The government should, okay, be accountable in terms of distributing funds. The government should, okay, distribute resources equally, okay, like what we are used to in our Papua New Guinea, in our villages and in our provinces, in our traditional settings. Okay. Okay. So with that, I will conclude here. So tomorrow we will look at Unit 7, the types of political system. With that, class dismissed.